every keynote tennis player has tactics that make him or her successful. Today on the On to Something podcast, we're going to be joined by Dr. Tim Russell and learn his tactics for what he's doing with the ITA, which is part of the governing body of college tennis. We're going to look at his career as a whole because he's done a lot with tennis. He's also done a lot in the academic space, and we're going to dive into that, really get to know Tim Russell. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio and a broadcaster for the USTA. Of course, Tim can be followed on Twitter at ITA CEO. I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. So, Tim, 9 years old, that love of tennis came through to you. What sparked it, and what was it about that moment when you first saw the game that you couldn't take your eyes off of it?
Yeah, well, it's wonderful to be with you, Bryan, and with your listeners. Sure appreciate everything you do for the sport. But my dearly departed mother was a college tennis player at Wilson College in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And she taught me tennis on the local public park. The interesting thing about me and my career is I have been a tennis player since I was 9, but I was actually not a college varsity tennis player. I've played while I was at Northwestern and Ohio State, but not on the varsity teams. But I've been enamored with the sport from the first time I picked up a racket, a number of things. One, even back with the old wooden rackets, because I'm going to date myself, I'm now 66, but it was a fast-paced game. I liked, as a very athletic person, I was mostly a track and basketball guy, that there was certain things having to do with speed. I was also a smart guy, and I don't say that to be arrogant, but I was like the, high school valedictorian. I thought tennis had a lot of strategy. I've always thought it was a combination between like ballet and chess. And I think for those people who know me, know I spent a lot of my career as an orchestra conductor, and I spent a lot of time in the ballet world. So I think it was a combination of, the tactics, but also the beauty of the game. I grew up watching the Arthur Ashes, the Stan Smiths. Then I came through the Jimmy Connors and John McEnroe era. And for me, watching the evolution of the game has been amazing, but I've always loved playing it from the age of 9. So you've done your homework.
Well, you love playing tennis when you were young and up to this day, but you also love playing the cello. And I want to know the difference in the strategy of you. So here you are, you love tennis, and you describe the reasons in which it really did become something that you fell in love with. And then there was also this musical component, which you talked about, but at the root of your musical love, if I'm not mistaken, Tim, the cello came into your life. And what was it about that instrument that very much resonated with you, and why you wanted to make that a big part of your life too, which would then lead on to all the success you were talking about in music?
Yeah, great question. So actually, I heard a cello played in church. I thought it was one of the most beautiful sounds I had ever heard. My parents weren't musicians, but growing up in New Haven, Connecticut, my father was a campus pastor at Yale, and we used to do things like attend the Schubert Theater, where Broadway shows would go to pilot test, but right before they went to Broadway. So I saw early runs of, Music Man, My Fair Lady, Sound of Music, Camelot. So I liked music. But I heard this cello and I thought it was not only beautiful, but I thought it really, to use your word, resonate. It resonated like the human voice. The cello can go from very low to very high sounds, but I not only liked the sound of the cello, I was enamored with some of the people who played it, and you've really crafted a really interesting interview here. I wasn't sure where we were going to start, but the way my career unfolded, even when I was a professor at Arizona State, I became really enamored between the acquisition of expertise and becoming a peak performer and comparing the arts and athletics. So one of the things I can tell you is I started playing the cello in 4th grade, right around the same time my mother taught me tennis, and then I started running track. But it became very clear to me early on, even through high school, and then part of what I studied in college, both undergrad at Northwestern and masters and PhDs at Ohio State, was trying to figure out how people get good at things. And, whether it's, your bow with the cello or your left hand, or whether it's your serve, or, when I was a hurdler on track, I was a fast guy, but I wasn't the fastest, but I really picked up tenths of seconds by perfecting my technique, for example. So I, from an early age, became fascinated on how do you get good at things and what can you do to speed up that process. So your connection with cello and sports is spot on.
Well, I want to get to another part of this connection, because right now you are, and we're joined by Tim Russell, CEO of ITA. I'm Bryan Fenley. You have this role where you are a leader in the ITA community and beyond, but also as a conductor, you had to be a leader as well. And in a way, what you're doing with the ITA is conducting. It's certainly not in the same format as what you do on the musical front, but what similarities do you see, Tim, from you standing up there like you've done for so many years and leading orchestras as a conductor, and then pouring in some of that expertise into conducting and growing what you're doing with the ITA?
You're actually giving the speech I usually give. I mean, this is no, I'm serious. This is amazing, because leadership is about getting a group of people to accomplish certain goals. So as a conductor, let's just take a Beethoven symphony. Beethoven's written this great piece. My job is to ultimately get 60 or 100 people to perform it the best way that they can. I've been affectionately saying for the last 7 years since taking this job, I've been trying to get 3,000 coaches to sing from the same playbook. So to that end, I think you always have a vision of the outcome. You end up creating a strategic plan, if you will, and the strategic plan then has a series of tactics. I know one of the first things you talked about when we started was tactics, and then you have an implementation plan, and then you evaluate and you create this circle. So actually being a conductor and being the ITA CEO are very similar. I used to compare being a conductor to being a head coach, whether it's Nick Saban or wherever. I mean, your job was to do everything from recruit the players to create the game plan. What does our offense look like? What does our defense look like? Then it was running the practices. And, the games, whether it's a tennis match, a football game, and a concert, are very similar. You put an audience there and you're going to get to deliver and see whether what you have been working on comes to fruition. Yeah, they're very similar.
As a conductor, and how that is involved and how that compares to what you're doing with the ITA now, I think one of your finest attributes is your ability to problem solve. And I think in the last little less than 2 years here, with everything we're dealing with, I've admired the way in which, Tim, you always looking for solutions. Like, you love the game in tennis so much, and you understand what it means to these up and comers in the sport to get those opportunities. Like, while you said being safe about it and everything, but take me into these meeting rooms where you're deciding on what to do as far as dealing with, obviously the ramifications of COVID. We're still working through that, but you always having, the goal and the betterment of the student athlete, the junior tennis player, the young professional in mind, really being an advocate for them and pushing to be a problem solver before anything else.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. I appreciate that observation. And, I'm very proud of what the ITA did. For example, it's a wonderful case study to get through the pandemic. And to your point, we're still navigating with, the advent of the Delta variant. But it was very clear this time last year that college tennis in the fall wasn't going to be exactly as it had always been. The ITA routinely runs upwards of 88 regional tournaments. There's an ITA Cup for our small colleges. There's our fall championships. And last year, we wanted to do a couple things. We wanted to demonstrate, and this gets to the goal and vision point I made a moment ago. We wanted to demonstrate that tennis could be a leader in the intercollegiate athletic space. So our goal didn't change, but we recognized that it couldn't be done just as it had in the past. So we were going to pivot a little bit, and we wanted to demonstrate that tennis was a safe social distancing sport, and we recognized that every school and conference was approaching COVID differently. So we pivoted away from our regionals into creating the fall circuit last year. And I think everybody knows that one of the most successful programs the ITA has is our summer circuit, where we intersect, junior players, high school players with college players. And we just actually, as an aside, finished our most successful one this year. But coming out of last year, we were one of the first, if not, I might even say we were the first sport governing body to reinstitute ongoing regular events. So it was last June, I'm not talking about 21, but in 20, we started up our summer circuit, and we usually have 55 tournaments or so, but we had 20, and we showed there was a great pent up demand for tennis. I don't want to jinx us, but we got through without any health issues. So all of a sudden, we said to ourselves, what if we use that same model so that college players and juniors could still play? The USTA wasn't running their events. The ITF wasn't running their events. And between September and December, we ran 160 events. And, I think it's a way, to use your phrase, problem solving, where we not only were trying to solve a problem, but we were trying to remain faithful to our goal. How can college tennis be a leader in the world of not only tennis, but in the world of intercollegiate athletics? So that's, I think, one good example.
When you go back to those days in June in the summer of 2020, and you see the smiles on these kids' faces, getting this opportunity to play, and like you said, being at the forefront of getting sports back in a healthy and safe way, what are some poignant remarks that you heard from the kids, or from the college students, or the young professionals, the juniors, females and males that have been involved in these tournaments, where they basically said thank you for doing this, but it touched you in an even more profound way, knowing the complications that surrounded these events to make them possible, and just to hear how much it meant to them? How does that sit with you, as far as when you hear comments that stood out during those early times and getting college tennis back at it, and like you said, sort of being that leader for other sports to look up to?
Yeah, I mean, one of the threads we're finding on our interview is you already know the answers to the questions, because while you were starting, the first most poignant comment was thank you. I mean, these people really recognized that it took a lot, and I'll give you an example, because you're well aware of the fact that, for example, our large sponsor at Oracle used to put on the Masters event at the Malibu Racket Club, and when things weren't going well in the LA county in which Malibu sits, we actually ran the Oracle ITA Masters at the Barnes Center in San Diego. And that was the first big event where all college top players came together with top juniors. And I think they recognized that it took a lot of work to do that. And we continued to do things like put it on TV. So the finals, as you well know, were on ESPNU, but just having players together and running a tournament, they recognize that. And quite honestly, as a leader, I've tried to never ask our staff to do something that I wouldn't do personally. And my wife and I actually went to San Diego. I had a couple of staff members who weren't comfortable going. We said, fine. Our partner with Ryan Redondo at the Barnes Center, was very much into all in on this. But the reality was, we had a whole series of junior and college players who wanted to be competing. That's what they do. When you started asking about me and my passions with cello and hurdles and tennis, tennis is a passion for these young people, and they didn't have, an outlet. So I think, we were able to demonstrate not only could we put on these events, but we could do them safely amidst a pandemic. And whether it was, a junior player upsetting a college player in San Diego, or whether it was, Brandon Holt, playing Cannon Kingsley in the finals, we touched a lot of lives, and I'm very proud of that.
You've also touched a lot of lives by the books that you've written, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Tim, is it up to 3 that you've written? Is it?
so it depends how we classify these, because I've been working on articles and books, and I always want to be full disclosure, because I've got a couple that aren't quite at the publication, but they're done, and I'll tell you what they're about. So I've
Yes.
done a lot of research with Ellen Langer, who's a Harvard professor, and if people get online and research Ellen, she is an incredible scholar who's written a lot about mindfulness, and not about mindfulness as in meditation, but hers is mindfulness without meditation. And the basic premise is, to be mindful, you have to notice new things. So I've been writing on mindful tennis and mindful music. Ellen and I did a study on mindfulness and orchestras, which has been published. But it's interesting you bring up the books, because I was just finishing some of them in 2015 when I took this job with the ITA. And it's one of the reasons that some of them haven't gotten published, is that this has become the hardest job I've ever had in terms of the amount of hours I work. So I was a professor and an orchestra conductor, but the ITA is a full-time job. And if you're going to be a writer, that's almost a full-time job. So at the point I finally retire, some people will finally see these published in the mainstream. So.
All right, as soon as those come out, we're going to interview you, because it would be fun to hear what it was like writing those and really getting into the nitty gritty of the messages you were trying to get across from these upcoming books. The UTR and the relationship that you have with them, how has that allowed you and the ITA to do unimaginable things, to work together to promote the game?
Yeah, so great question. The ITA, under the leadership of David Benjamin, was incredibly, visionary. David Benjamin really was the Pied Piper and the architect of college tennis as we know it today. And about 15 years ago, in the early UTR derivations, I'm talking about the days of Dave Howell as the early owner, and guys like Dave Fish, the Harvard coach, who had a vision for how level-based play could be promoted in America and around the world. The ITA actually was the first group that actually said, we're going to work with UTR. And very quickly, the coaches loved it. And very quickly, junior players loved it. And the first thing it enabled people to do was to get a better handle on recruiting. As most people know, if you go on a website, if you go on the UTR website, they can tell you what the average UTR is at North Carolina, Chapel Hill, whether it's the men's or women's team. And if you're a junior player, you know what it's going to take to even be considered. And as most people know, college tennis is by definition level-based. So for example, as our partnership with UTR emerged, we started doing things like partnering with them on the summer circuit, which we've already referenced. So right now, as people know, it's the ITA summer circuit powered by, UTR. And then to your point about things that were unimaginable to some, not only is the ITA very fluid and flexible, but so is UTR. So back to that illustration of last fall, our partners at UTR were very happy to entertain the notion of the fall and winter circuits. And we had all the infrastructure in place, and they have the tech tools online to be able to run tournaments. And our tournament directors are already familiar with it. So it enabled us to very quickly pivot amidst the pandemic. And as we've evolved, they have, evolved as well. I think people know that Mark Leshley and his group came in and bought UTR. They've done amazing work, and not only, developing the algorithm, but developing more tech tools. Everybody basically wants to grow the game of tennis, right? We all want to develop different communities, but I think where UTR and the ITA intersect is a sweet spot for the tennis ecosystem in many ways, because college tennis really is the connective tissue, in the tennis ecosystem. It's an aspirational goal, for juniors. It's also in and of itself a great enterprise, but it's also one, avenue to becoming a pro tennis player, or just to become a league player, down the road. And UTR, I think, is helping to connect the ecosystem, and they've been doing a terrific job in that regard.
Tim Russell, Dr. Tim Russell is with us, ITA CEO. I'm Bryan Fenley, a broadcaster with USTA. One more fun question for you, Tim, wrapping up here. And that is, you talk about an ecosystem. So what is the ecosystem like around you as a grandfather?
Hey, that's the best part of life.
Yeah.
You've completely researched my life, and I appreciate your insight. So my wife and I have two children. Our son Jeff actually works for player development with the USTA, lives in Orlando, works at the national campus. Our daughter Kate lives here in Phoenix. Kate and her husband Bryan have four children, two girls, two boys, and Jeff has three girls. So we are the proud grandparents of 7 grandkids. And on a given time in Phoenix, we could be at a soccer match with the oldest grandson, who's now on his first club team. We could be at a gymnastics meet with the 2 girls. We could be at the barn where they ride horses. If we're down visiting Lake Nona, we could be with Jeff and his family at a soccer game, or on a tennis court, or at a picnic. And all of us occasionally connect up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the summers, where my wife and I have a part of a family cottage. So sometimes we're really lucky and we get occasionally a Christmas or occasionally a summer where the 2 kids and the 7 grandkids are all together, and that's as good as it gets.
As I'm listening to that, one thing is for sure with Tim Russell, sports is always going to be orbiting his life, as well as his family, and being close with them and supporting them along the way. Dr. Tim Russell, ITA CEO. I'm Bryan Fenley. Tim, so much fun diving into your life. Really appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks for all you do. It was a pleasure.